Thank you, everybody, for joining. Good amount of participants here. Thank you all for your time. We've got some amazing speakers today. I'm very, very excited. And I think we're 3:02, so let's kick this off, team. Are we ready, panelists? Excited?
We are.
All right, let's do this. So everybody who's joining us again, thank you so much. Please bear with me. I am on the tail end of a flu, traditional flu, like the old school ones that used to go around before the dreaded COVID. But I will have some water breaks and some throat lozenges, and I'm very pleased to have a co-moderator with me to help me through this one today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Dornberg. I am the president of COMMB, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today to the first event in our COMMB Talks Quebec series. So this is an exciting time for us, a new series that we're launching specifically focused on the Quebec market. It's very important to us, and we have some incredible panelists. But before we get to our panelists, I do want to introduce my co-moderator today, Luis Arrayas. Could you give us a little intro, please?
Yes, that was pretty good. Luis Arrayas. So I'm VP Channel Strategy and Partner at Cartier, and I'm also chairman of the Media Directors Committee at A2C, which is the association that gathers all the agencies in the Quebec market. I've been 16 years in the business, previously at Marketel, previously at Cassette, now 5 years at Cartier as one of the four owners of the agency and running the media practice here at Cartier.
Amazing. Thank you for taking the time out of your, what I know is a very, very busy schedule to join us here today and to co-moderate this very exciting panel. So let's get to some panelist introductions. Catherine, would you like to start us off?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here today. My name is, well, you can see it on the screen, Catherine Léveillé. I work at Desjardins as a senior media consultant, consultant advisor. And previously, I worked alongside Jérôme, actually, at Quebecor for 8 years in media creativity. So very happy and excited to be talking to you today about the Quebec specificities of out-of-home. I'm very passionate about out-of-home advertising in general. So hello, everyone.
Love it. Thank you for joining us. And Marianne, will you give us a little intro?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Marianne Cochin. I've been working at Glassroom for almost 4 years now, and I've been in the media agency world for 8 years. And I've been working with a lot of different clients, some very specific to Quebec, like Producteurs de lait du Québec, some also like McDonald's, and now I'm working a lot with Desjardins, with Catherine. So I'm also I'm very passionate about out-of-home as well. It's always been one of my favorite medias. So I'm very excited to talk about this today.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Jerome, give us a little intro.
Hi, hello. And for some of you that read the original program, I am not Patricia Heckman, but she unfortunately has COVID. But I've stepped in to replace her. So my name is Jerome Lace. I am the Senior Director of Media Solutions with Quebecor. I'm here in the Toronto office, but obviously our specialty is to help everybody try to figure out Quebec and make it work for them. And today I promise that I will just stick to out-of-home. Amanda said she's going to reel me in if I start veering off into other platforms. But today I'm all about the out-of-home.
Thank you so much. And certainly last but not least, Shannon, will you give us a little intro?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. Shannon Wells from Bell Media, also Astro. What can I say? Basically, about 20 years in the media industry, and then I was 10 years prior to that, so I'm showing my age, 10 years prior to that on the client side as a marketing and manager. So understand a lot of the challenges, both sides of the fence. So very excited to get the discussion going about out-of-home. I think we all can agree that for the last couple of years we were put on the back burner, and I'm looking very forward to A, talking about out-of-home, and B, bringing Quebec and its uniqueness up to the forefront today. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all of my panelists today. Very, very excited to have you here. So as Shannon said, let's dive right into this. Quebec is a very unique market. And certainly I think that comes with some regional requirements, different regulatory requirements. And so I'm curious, what are some of those regional requirements? What are some of those regulatory restrictions or requirements that specifically within the Quebec market that we need to be aware of as brands, as advertisers, as media owners? And perhaps I could solicit Marianne and Catherine to start us off on this, and then panelists feel free to jump in wherever you have some information to share with us, please.
Yeah, for sure. So I can start. So in terms of regulations in Quebec, well, for most medias, I mean, for all media in Quebec, we cannot advertise to children. So same goes for out of home as well. So that's the main one that you have to know when you get into the Quebec market. We also have specific regulations towards billboards, because we cannot have animated billboards. In the rest of Canada, you can, but here you can. So it's important to know that nothing can be distracting to drivers. So that's an interesting fact. In terms of also specific city regulations, let's say Montreal and Toronto are two different markets, because there are fewer like billboards in Montreal than in Toronto, for example, because also it's regulated per neighborhood, and the neighborhoods have a say about the advertising that can be in the different neighborhoods. So we don't have many new options. If an old board goes down, it does not necessarily come back up. So it's interesting to get a little bit of the know of the land before you get into an out-of-home campaign in Montreal, for example. And of course, we have French. I mean, you hear it with our accent. We are French first, and it's very important to know that even if, like, yes, in Quebec we have cities that are bilingual, like Montreal. Out-of-home still needs to be always in French, so you have to find other ways to reach your English customers in Montreal. So fun rules to know about.
Fun fact, I have found the regulatory components, Marianne, that you touched on, very interesting. And just for context for those listening who are joining us from other markets, in other markets across the country in the Canadian space, it's generally a city-based bylaw that deems your regulatory requirements as an out-of-home media player. But in the Montreal market specifically, it's a borough-based in addition to a city-based overarching bylaw. So it's quite interesting. Catherine, what do you have to share with us?
Well, one key thing that we always have in mind in Desjardins, and Desjardins, just so you know, it's a proud Quebec industry, but we based our model, our cooperative model, on the idea that we could reach and we could offer financial support to Quebecers, not just in cities, but very much in all regions of Quebec. So when we do out-of-home campaign planning, it's always at the top of our mind to be mindful of having, yes, city reach, because in Quebec, there's Montreal, there's Trois-Rivières, there's Quebec City, but there's also more specific regions that are not necessarily that you cannot necessarily buy with big media partners, right? It's a bit more fragmented in terms of the market. So it's something to keep in mind when you do out of home in Quebec and you want to be very, very specific in terms of your regional buys. Quebec, the province of Quebec is not just 3 or 4 big cities, it's also many other smaller cities. And it's something that is very key for us to have that representation and have that awareness in those smaller markets. Something to keep in mind.
For context, name those smaller markets, just so our
there's
participants.
such a long list. We were talking about it with Marianne previously, because we do that quite often with our campaigns. Marianne, is there anything that comes to mind? I know we did it for the Fonds du Grand Mouvement campaign 2 or 3 years ago with a very, very specific buys. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
I mean, we go everywhere where there's a caisse, which is like a Desjardins, and it's everywhere in Quebec. So you go as far as Abitibi, as Jonquière, like up north, in the east, in the west, like it's everywhere. So every little market, we try to find a way to advertise there. So
I would say there's a good chance that 80% of them start with something.
Yes.
And it takes time to do those planning, right? So if you want to be more specific, just be mindful of the time it can take, because as we said, it's very fragmented when we go outside of big cities.
Cool.
Very interesting.
Well, thanks a lot for giving us the specificities about the market from a out-of-home perspective. But if we jump into more, let's talk about Quebec from a cultural perspective. What is something that is appealing to advertisers about the Quebec market and its cultural baggage?
I'll jump in. We've been working for a few years now with Léger, who published a book called Cracking the Quebec Code, which is, I recommend to any of you interested in Quebec that have not read it. You know, and they did a little study and try and sort of quantify how different Quebec is, and based on all of the traits that they looked at, they sort of came up with Quebecers are 29% different. So we're like that 29% is the key, and they categorize it into 7 key traits. I'm not going to get into all of them, like that in and of itself is a long presentation, but you know, it allows us to sort of take a look at how Quebecers, everybody sort of immediately thinks of language and goes, okay, they're French, but it's really a mix, because it's, yes, there's this French language, but there's also the influence of English Canada as well as the US. So it's a very specific blend of that, and you get certain traits that come out of that you have to take into consideration when you're doing your planning and when you're looking at your messaging, and things like Quebecers tend to really love immediate benefits rather than future merits. So I think Catherine, working at a bank, probably is well aware that Quebecers are don't like to buy mortgages, but they like to take out a loan to go on vacation. It's very different from the rest of Canada, but what's important really is to resonate in the market, is to stay very authentic and creative. And I think in terms of like the cultural aspects, those are the easiest ones for advertisers outside of Quebec to efficiently reach them. So you have an opportunity with out of home to do creative that resonates. It's not as complicated or as costly as with some other mediums, and that's a great opportunity that you have to use the out of home medium to create something that resonates with the population. And because of this, we've noticed a lot of advertisers who try to tap into that have really started doing more and more stunts. That's something that we can see in terms of the amount of requests we get, because they realize that stunts work really well and resonate well with the population. In the Montreal market, there isn't a big spectacular structure like Dundas Square or anything like that. So you have to rely on some of the smaller products that you have there. But it's interesting to see, and we've noticed the growth as people look at Quebec and try to find ways to make it sense. We've noticed the growth in the amount of RFPs we're getting to do something that actually uses out of home and takes it outside the box and takes it beyond sort of the traditional manner in which everybody thinks of using it. And that would be, I think, my number one suggestion there on how to tap into the culture.
I have seen a great deal of creative executions in the Quebec market specifically that transform the transit shelters into these experiences essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and it is like it's so impactful, and that's really interesting. I was unaware that it was sort of a cultural driver to that.
If you re-look at the cultural elements and look at the love of creativity, and you realize that the fun aspect of it, and if you look at it a lot of the time, the more successful ones will tap into the humor, right? Humor is another big trait, and you'll see that will immediately get a better reaction. And people enjoy the interactivity. So don't forget that out of home can be a lot more than just displaying an image.
I love that. I love that. I kind of want to stay on this vein a little bit of like the cultural perception. So Shannon, I'm going to point this question to you specifically. Can you talk a little bit about how audiences in the Quebec market perceive out of home as a medium? I know we heard a little bit from Jerome about, that humor is important to it, but perhaps do you have any studies that you've done on the perception of out of home, or anything that you want to share relative to the adoption rate specifically for out of home in the Quebec market?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I think it's a great point that Jerome brought up. I think when we talk about national media planning, let's be honest, a lot of times we'll talk about, hey, TV can cover the English market, and we forget about Quebec.
No TV on this panel.
TV, exactly. But to Jerome's point, out of home becomes that attractive and cost-efficient opportunity for the province, right? And you can check off a box and reach that distinct market. absolutely through creativity. And we think if we don't have a Dundas Square, but we do have, great opportunities. We talk about, metro station dominations, et cetera, et cetera. We do have that. And that is part of our landscape here in Quebec. And I'd say in terms of studies, not specific studies to Quebec. We do have studies about the effectiveness of out-of-home, et cetera, throughout the country. But I think it's a challenge that I put out there for all of us. And I'm looking at our friends at Desjardins. We do a lot of business together. And I think we should absolutely take something away and look at a case study specific to Quebec. What I will tell you in that notion of investing in Quebec and why out-of-home in Quebec, when we look at a national spend, out-of-home share of voice is actually greater. Share of wallet is actually greater across the traditional media in Quebec, probably in the range over the last 5 years of anywhere between 13 to 16%, versus in the rest of the country.
I'm sorry, can we pause on that percentage?
Yes.
Well, let's repeat that. That was a big percent.
Absolutely. Again, across traditional medium, but I think it's important. And I think that, there are global studies that talk about exactly that, about the investment and doubling down in out-of-home. And we can see the lift that those brands actually benefit from when you double down on out-of-home. So it's I obviously I'm preaching and I'm a little bit biased here, but I think we need to understand that Quebec has gained a greater share of wallet across those traditional mediums in Quebec versus rest of Canada. And it's something that I think is important when we're talking about our planners throughout the country.
I love that. There was a little bit of an allusion to, Desjardins, who's a national buyer, you buy in the English-speaking markets as well. But I'm going to point this to the two media owner, this question specifically. So Shannon and Jerome, is there something from a national buying perspective that you really want the national buyers and the brands who are perhaps listening here, the agencies that are joining that represent those national brands? Is there something that you really want them to understand about the Quebec market specifically? Maybe Jerome, I'll start with you, and then Shannon, you can follow up on that.
Sure. There's a couple things. So there's a couple practical things, like, and I've heard this, so I'm going to point it out. People are like, "Oh, Montreal, isn't winter horrible?" Like, I'm not going to advertise in winter. So we've actually
I hope it's not too cold.
We've actually raised the bus shelters so that the posters are above the snow level. So we've actually thought of things like that, and that's what we've done with our stuff. But a lot of people they've adapted. So first of all, we don't want you to think, oh, it's not, it's not going to work, because we're in the market, we know what to do. We're also doing things like getting, obviously you can't get power everywhere, so we're starting to do like solar panel things so that you can still be backlit at night even if there's no power in the sidewalk. And because yes, it's night sooner, so in winter. So there's like a lot of adaptation that's happening. So don't be afraid of the medium just because of the market it's in. And the other thing too is, as a medium, out-of-home answers extremely well to proximity to the people. And in Quebec, kind of going back a little to my Code Quebec, one of the 7 traits is sort of what they call the villager behavior, and how Quebecers really love their proximity. And earlier, I think it was Catherine was mentioning like the boroughs, and in Montreal, like, people are all about their borough. It's not even just about their city, and forget like Canada or even Quebec. Like, they're very into what's going on in their immediate lives. And out-of-home is a great medium in that province to be able to efficiently tap into that tendency. And so I would recommend that people think about that when they're making the decisions, because it will it's an extra thing they can do. The other thing I want to mention too is sometimes people think because Quebec's a smaller market, they kind of assume that there's fewer players, but it's actually just as fragmented as everywhere else. So I'll be completely transparent that, like, as much as in TV, we tend to like have big dominant stations. If you want transit in all of Montreal, you actually have to call a couple different people. Like, it's the same thing with Quebec City. So people assume that because it's smaller markets, they can just call one player and it's all done. And no, we're actually pretty fragmented, just like some of the bigger English Canadian markets are. So that's something.
That small market is it's the second largest market in Canada, my friend.
Yes, but when people tend to, I find being in Toronto, the perception is I'm doing the rest of Canada and then I'm doing Quebec. So then it's just like this little 20% compared to everything else. So
that's why we're here, right? We need to talk about
exactly.
these things.
That's why I'm saying it's don't assume that because it's that last little 20% that it's not doesn't have a bunch of players in there.
Shannon, do you have anything to add? I know Luis has a killer question coming up for the
Yeah.
group, but before
Maybe
you wanna add
just to
anything?
add on that, and Jerome's absolutely right. I think, and I don't want to turn this into a sales shtick, but we talk about weather. We spend a lot of time in the in the metro stations, and we have an underground city in Montreal. We make reference in Toronto to the path. People talk about the path, but the path in Quebec, and Louis and others can attest to this. Proximity marketing in boroughs, in our metro stations, et cetera, et cetera. The consumer journey in Montreal, there's a lot of time, especially in the winter months, that spends time in those stations. And the underground path, I could be wrong, but I think it's like 27 kilometers of underground city. So it's it's very, very important. And I think a lot of people make the association with the path in Toronto, and quite frankly, it's not the same thing. It's different. So research it. We'll be glad to highlight those differences for you. But it is when the juxtaposition or the difference between, hey, what about the snow? What about the weather? Well, yes, that transportation method, that proximity marketing is very important in Quebec.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Shannon. Next question. I'll kind of jump into the answer as well, because it's about the strength of out of home in Quebec, and for me, Quebec is more than just one market. Quebec is so complex. There's Montreal. There's just sometimes when we don't live the market, we tend to forget that Montreal is actually an island. So if you want to go to Montreal, you don't have the option to like either cross the bridge or take the subway to get to the island. So it kind of creates a whole dynamic with out of home, and it creates actually a lot of opportunities. So my question to Mathiane and Catherine is, what are your how do you perceive the strength of out of home in Quebec?
Personally, I quite agree with all of what you said so far. Like, it is true that in Quebec, like, even if, yes, there is a winter, and yes, like, our habits can change, and all of our media habits can change actually, but like media out of home stays pretty consistent in terms of reach. And yes, we change our paths, like we go underground, and we can change routes, but it stays very relevant. And for targets that are extremely important for brands, like the targets that are on the go and that are not necessarily reachable by all the other medias that we know. Sometimes it's a very fragmented universe out there to reach, like the families that are on the go and the younger people that are on the go. And out of home has always been a good media to reach them. I think it's true for Quebec, but it's also true for the rest of Canada though. But we really see that in Quebec as well. And it's interesting because it's also very connected to our other medias. For example, we do see immediately that out of home is noticed, because when we launch a campaign, we immediately see like surges. So we do notice that it is very strong in Quebec. I don't know if you want to add something, Catherine.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And I think I can go all day about the strengths of out of home, to be frank, but I'll try to be quite synthesized. But you're right.
Shout it out loud, girl. Shout it out loud.
But you're right. And I think to your point, Marianne, out of home is great for awareness, but it's also great for action-driven lifts, right? So like you were mentioning, it's good for search, but to lift search volumes, but it's also good to just bring more massive awareness to a particular campaign or offer. To me, if I go a bit deeper, there are two key elements that I think more specifically for Desjardins even that make the strength of out of home. The first one is the target audience. So yes, out of home is a mass media, but it's also very, very good at targeting more harder to reach target audiences in Quebec. And when I say harder to reach, I say people that are very busy. So we can think of business owners, the famous segment MOPEs, With out of home, we're able to reach them more massively. Same goes to youth target audiences. They very much have ad blockers. They're always on Netflix. They don't necessarily tap into all the content that we may try to push them on other platforms. So out of home is really good at grabbing their attention. And same also goes to mothers that are busy and are always on the go and don't have time to cool down and watch TV at the end of the day. So out of home is great to reach them and grab their attention more in a better and more efficient way. And then the second thing is the state of mind of people while they are on the go, which is a data that I use often internally. If you can maybe guess it, when people are on the go, the number one topic they think about is finance. So in Quebec, so that opportunity of context for us as in terms of a financial institution is great, because it's a perfect opportunity to talk to our target when they're thinking about a subject that we can directly help them with, right? But it's also true, though, there's finance that is at the top, but there's also grocery shopping. What are they going to eat? What are they going to do on the weekend? So these are all industries that can benefit from out of home, because it is right into the context of what their target audience is thinking, right? So these are sort of two things that I think out of home is great for.
Cool. And it's funny because we also have this relation with traffic and construction that is probably the biggest topic here in Quebec, in the province in Quebec. It's
you see my face just shift there, Louis?
It's
How is
huge.
the traffic
So
and the construction? Because I'm about to be in Montreal tomorrow.
there's always traffic, there's always construction, and because you got to take the bridge or the tunnel or whatever. So the tunnel, one of the main tunnels to go to Montreal, is actually partially closed for a couple of years. So it creates a lot of frustrations, but it also creates a lot of opportunities for out of home, because it's part of our life. It's just so relatable for Quebecois to be caught on traffic and to consume out of home in a very specific way. So
contextual relevance, right?
Yeah. So my next question is actually a question for Shannon. Is knowing the context of out of home and the strength that it has in the Quebec market, what are some of the brands that have had more success in Quebec than the rest of Canada in terms of out of home?
Yeah, so we've seen clients coming back. The interesting thing, you talked about dwell time. I will tell you that anybody who challenged me that, hey, traffic patterns aren't what they used to be, I'll invite them to come for a little visit in Montreal and sit on any of our arteries and or our public transit. One of the things we do well is we sell. I wish I had actually bought shares in Orange Cones, because I think I would have been retired by now. But no, seriously, our city, unfortunately, especially specifically in Montreal, has created these traffic jams. We're very, happy for that because the dwell times are off the charts. But we're seeing, communications companies coming back, a lot of telcos coming back. We're seeing retail is really, very, very strong for us. And brand specific, I can talk about, Cook It, Aeroplan. I've got Holt Renfrew here, Lowe's, Burke's, obviously our friends, Desjardins, Circle K and Couche-Tard. I mean, and these are brands that are standing out in the market. They're investing throughout the country, but doubling down on out of home. So we're happy to see them. Big brands that are national advertisers, yet they're, like I say, to the point, doubling down in Quebec.
Thanks.
Hope that helps.
Yeah,
that's great. Jerome, do you have any brands you want to highlight that you guys are seeing some killer success with?
Desjardins, no?
Desjardins,
Desjardins, absolutely. Actually, we just had a fabulous execution with them for their Aviso brand, so that's for sure. I in terms of answering your question of like Quebec versus Canada, we only have it in Quebec, so it's hard for me to compare how somebody's having success in Quebec versus the rest. But we have certainly seen, a lot of brands that have come on board with us to especially this like towards the end of the year, where have come back, and basically the ones Shannon mentioned, right? Where we're seeing the same trends in all of the categories.
It's a good
it's
breadth
been
of categories, though. I
yeah,
have to
yeah,
say, it's really great.
and this is very personal to us with transit shelters, but we've now have the okay from the STM to actually do car advertising on, because for a while they were like, well, we're a bus, so you shouldn't be advertising a car because that's kind of our competition. But they are now allowing us to do stunts and everything with automotive. So we're very excited because it's like a whole new it's a category where maybe weren't tapping into as much, that we're all, I think, waiting for the return of. We're,
Yes.
we're all hoping for that to return. But we've
COMMB
certainly
sent
seen
a really
like,
great category deck on automotive. If
yeah,
you need some stats
and
from an
we've
industry
seen, you know,
perspective, we can help you with that.
we've seen travel starting to ramp up. That's
Yeah.
been one that's really come back recently. So it's exciting.
I love it. I know that Catherine Desjardins, very active in out of home. So I see your campaigns. I live right downtown Toronto. It's literally behind me in the background here that you could see. And I do see your advertisements from an out of home perspective. And perhaps I'm biased because I look at all out of home. I need to see what our members are doing and what brands are active. And then I like to keep a list of the brands that I see in out of home that I might get retargeted to via my mobile phone. So I'd love to hear from you about some recent campaign highlights, executions that you've done, leveraging out of home, and just give us some examples.
Yeah. Marianne, do you want to go first? We have two examples, I think, for you. Marianne, do you want to go first with the youth campaign?
Yeah, for sure. One campaign that we're quite proud of this year with Desjardins is our youth campaign. It did win some prizes at the IDEA festival this year. So it was very interesting because we thought about it out of home first. So it's really like we took the path that youth would take like in the city, and we decided on a few locations that could be relevant to them, and creatively we also use the codes that are relevant to a younger crowd. And basically our advertisement was a bunch of different situations, personal finance situations that you could find yourself in, and that could cause like discomfort or shame, kind of like, let's say you decided to buy that fashion jacket instead of paying your rent. So let's say you're in that situation, what do? So what we did was having a bunch of QR codes on those different situations that were represented in out of home, and that would drive to longer content that could give you more content about what you can do in those situations and how to get better with finances. And I was quite surprised because we didn't really know if the QR code system would really work with that target. But I think we really hit the nail on that one because our locations were good, and the codes were, the graphic codes that we used were probably good as well, because people did scan it and did consult the content that we posted online. So it was very like this youth target really responded well to the out of home media, and we managed to connect all of the others and creating a story based on out of home. So really proud of that one.
I love that. That's very creative too, especially for a youth target, to like give them advice. I mean, as young youth, the last thing you do often is listen to your parents' advice. So if you can get free advice, in something that resonates with you in a contextual moment, I think that's really very creative.
Yeah, and we were especially surprised with the engagement that we received, like Marianne said, which was a big win for us on that campaign, because typically QR codes on out-of-home bus shelter, it's not necessarily what we would think would drive engagement, but it did. So it was very interesting. I wanted to talk about our more business enterprise campaign, but hearing you talk, Jérôme, about stunts inspired me. So I can maybe touch on another campaign we did with Desjardins Insurance, which was for the Ajusto online services, more specifically. And what we did is we launched a stunt, like Jérôme mentioned, where we had a 3D structure of a hand holding a cell phone on top of an out-of-home bus shelters. And we had them in different areas of Montreal, and it was to grab people's attention about that big hand on top of an out-of-home bus shelter to drive awareness for.
Did you mean pun intended? You were grabbing their attention?
Oh, I didn't mean it, but I'll pretend I did. So yeah, and it was a great, first of all, it was a great stunt to really just boost awareness on that Ajusto online service. But also what we did, what that was interesting is we leverage other media mixes around to promote that stunt, right? So on the launch of that 3D structure, we had the live weather report team from Salut Bonjour, the top morning show in Quebec, come to the location of the out-of-home stunt and do the live weather report for the whole show directly from that out-of-home stunt. So it was a way for us to, yes, have awareness in Montreal about that new product, but also reach more massively through the out-of-home creative stunt, the rest of Quebec, which was a very fun campaign for us to activate.
Sounds like you combined some TV with some out of home.
What
I was
media
trying.
gets
We couldn't
What media
help
gets the-
ourselves. I'm sorry. We just had to.
what media gets the incremental reach, the out of home or the TV?
Not answering that question. I'm just kidding.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to jump in. So I mean, so when you guys are planning, so we have the chance to have the agency side and the client side with us today. So when agencies and clients are planning out of home, what are you guys looking for from out of home?
I can start if you want from the agency standpoint. So basically, ultimately, what we want to do in an agency is to deliver the right message at the right time to the right person at the right moment. So advertising, like out-of-home advertising, is a very good way to do that. But we are looking for partners that can allow us to actually have data around those targets and locations and where can we actually find our customers. Let's say for our insurance campaigns with Desjardins, we could be looking for people who are looking to buy a new home or get a new car and they would have insurance needs. So a media partner that could help us really understand where those people are and with like data-driven solutions that's really important for us. And it's even better if we can actually connect the data that we have with their data so that we can really be stronger together. So yeah, I think that's our main focus here is really to be relevant contextually and have partners that understand that.
Yeah. And also I think, and we work very closely together, Marianne and I, and our model at Desjardins is very much a one team model where we plan the campaigns together. So I would have the same answer as Marianne, but also another point, one big question that you can always help us answer, because I think it's a continuous question that we're always going to be asking ourselves when we talk about out of home, is how can we keep innovating within that media platform, because creativity is so key in out of home, and even more so in Quebec. As Jérôme mentioned it in the 7 traits of the Code Quebec. Quebecers are particularly, they value creativity. So how can we innovate, can continue to innovate with out-of-home placements, whether it's through real-time data, like Marianne said, or even synergy within other media mixes, like we were mentioning with the Ajusto campaign, the stunts. This is also a way to be creative and to be innovative, and we're looking for partners to drive us forward and inspire us through innovative and new ideas all the time.
I love this. And if anybody's looking for the Code Quebec, those 7 traits, it is in the chat. It did go to everyone on the chat, so please feel free to click that link. I want to kind of stay on the vein of this, the innovation, the data-driven, the contextual side of things, because, you know, there's always the discussion about trends between static digital, and programmatic digital out of home. So I'm going to point this to Jérôme first, and then perhaps Shannon, if you want to chime in, if you have any additional commentary that you want to add in on this topic. But are you actually seeing any trends right now between static digital, programmatic digital out of home? Like, let's talk the talk.
Yeah, we are, although 2022 created some weirdness, I think, in those trends. So we've been seeing digital growing pretty steadily. And then, you know, when programmatic launched as well, it was sort of taking, and it didn't look like there was a lot of cannibalization at first. It was more like, you know, programmatic was creating new opportunities. It wasn't so much making people who are already buying digital move over. So that was all looking great. And then kind of, we noticed in 2022, as people's budgets were very uncertain and things were getting a little wacky and people having supply chain issues, we noticed this, but we also sort of checked it out at the full market level, and it seemed to bear out that for Quebec anyway, there was a lot more out-of-home clients than the previous year, but with smaller budgets. And what that meant is they weren't buying as wide a breadth of products or platforms. So they were maybe picking just one, and then that choice was very driven by, I think, what Catherine just mentioned is like the need to pinpoint specifically one thing. So it was a lot more focused. And as a result, I think we saw digital sort of slow down a bit because maybe digital wasn't necessarily always, especially people are trying to talk to people, near their homes. A lot of the digital networks tend to be concentrated in more like high traffic downtown locations. So there was a bit of a movement there where I think we saw a trend where people were rethinking how they were deciding what to do. Towards the end of this fall, though, the last few months, we've seen it sort of snap back to where it was before, where now suddenly we're seeing people buy broader and put
Do
more
you think that
digital
has
in
to
there.
do with the holiday season, or?
It could be, but we saw it even before the holiday stuff started, like as early as October. I think we're just seeing people put bigger budgets and be less reactive. And so when
Right.
they plan a broader, then they're including more platforms and allows them to. I'm not sure about everybody in the market, but we've also become a lot more flexible about how you can buy digital. So that might also make a difference instead of being stuck in networks. That helps. But we've just seen the demand. So I'm thinking, and we're looking at, what's being said in North America and what's happening in Canada, and Quebec's usually like a year or two behind on all platforms. It's not just out of home, it's always just the way Quebec stays a little more traditional for a little longer. My prediction though is that you'll see Quebec snap in with all the other trends very quickly. And for programmatic, there we've had a steady growth. And in fact, in 2022, we doubled. So we have twice as much year over year coming through programmatic. I
Do you think
think
that's due to the contextualization of audiences? Because you're such a
yes.
market that really drives that contextual message, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's also just the fact that the programmatic allows the advertisers to be a lot more data driven. And Catherine and Marianne just talked about that, right? They're looking for better data, and the programmatic platforms give them some better attribution and certain pieces of data that are harder to get with a more traditional buy. So I think that's driving programmatic quite a bit. So I don't know if I can predict that it'll double again, but it's certainly definitely gone from something that a few people were testing out to a pretty standard offering with all key partners.
I love hearing that. Shannon, just like riding this wave, if we will, we're going to surf on that wave. Are there other things that you think in the marketplace the industry needs to work on specifically for the Quebec market? What are your thoughts there?
So industry to work on, interesting. I think from a buying and selling perspective, I think education. We talked about data. We talked about where we're at. Talked about programmatic. I think education is probably something that I would say things have, our technologies, our abilities have changed and evolved drastically in the last 3 years. And quite frankly, let's be honest, we were sort of put on the back burner. I keep going back to that. And turnovers in agencies, turnovers in clients, etc. I think we need to become more and more prominent within our agencies. We talked about multimedia executions. Use out of home as a measurable media which can actually be optimized. Where I think historically we talked about traditional, paper and glue, and but seriously, and this is
so relevant, but
it's absolutely relevant, but needs to change. And we can use data for our static boards and use that to influence, opportunities. Absolutely, data is absolutely key. And I think as more and more data becomes available, and the cleaner and cleaner that data becomes, I think we can start making some very, very key and important decisions on that. We've got a lot of movement in the web and digital landscape. We've been miles and miles ahead of this and out of home, and we know this. Unfortunately, from a buying standpoint and from a planning standpoint, I think out of home has often been sort of the joker, which I like to use to any hand as opposed to the primary execution. And I love that Desjardins and Glassroom planned it that way, as this is going to be a primary medium. So I think that's something that's hugely important. I think we need to do a better job of demonstrating the effectiveness of it, all of us combined, and providing that data. But it's going to come not just from the the sellers, but also from the buyers, and connecting
And from
the pipes.
COMMB.
Yeah, and from COMMB, of course, but also connecting that. And I think we got to go back to the topic of studies and actually having some case studies together to promote the overall use of out of home. I think that's something that's massively important. And we're talking about path to purchase and delivering the message at the right time to the right person. Well, let's understand that it's not just the top of the funnel here for out of home, but we can actually optimize and get the cost of acquisition associated to out of home, where we know where that's going in most media plans. And I think we have to do a better job of changing that narrative. Long answer.
I love that. Love that. That's great. We've got about 13 minutes left. Luis, I know you've got like a heavy hitting kind of broad question that you wanted to throw to the panelists. So I'm going to give you the floor here.
So if you could describe a win that you had in the Quebec market versus any other Canadian market. I'll start off with Jérôme. And the win could be anything. I think it could be from a data standpoint, could be from a creative standpoint, from an execution standpoint. Anything that actually stood out that you have to share with us today?
Sure. Well, I can talk about something. So, writing on what Catherine was already mentioning about, how we try to take the out-of-home medium and extend it out. She was mentioning about, in our case, we use our weather reports in our morning show to highlight what's going on on a stunt location. But we realized that, and Shannon was just talking about, the funnel, and digital is ever present and is a big part of everything. So we're trying to find ways that we can bring those two worlds together. And so we recently did a campaign for Fizz, which, for those of you who aren't in Quebec, is a completely like online phone service. So it's, there's no stores, like you just call up and get your phone, and it goes after younger demos. And we're trying to tap into this whole, Quebecers like creativity, but also the fact that a lot of the younger demographics are living on social media a lot more. So because Fizz, like Desjardins, both have great taste, and green is their major, their key color, they actually transformed a transit shelter into a green screen and allowed people to stand in front of it and then go online and use a social app that would allow them to customize their own Fizz ad using the green screen shelter. And then once they were done, their ad would appear on the digital screen of the shelter, so they would actually become the ad. But then they could keep it and share it and send it out. So it's basically a way of looking at out of home as the starting point of something, but growing it and leveraging other platforms, and not looking at it so much as like competition and fighting for different parts of the funnel, and more like how do we combine them and how do we use them together to get an augmented and even greater reach. So that to me is the kind of example of, for us, what's a big win. And I think what we're trying to do more and more of is how can we take this medium and help it make sense and help it get augmented with everything else that's around it.
Thanks. And do you have anything to add, Shannon, on that topic? Or
it's very, very similar to what Jérôme was saying. I think it's not necessarily specific to Quebec, but recently I'm sure people saw the road to radio execution, not to bring back our Canadian soccer team. But there was a beautiful campaign with Frito-Lay for the takeover of the goals for the Canadian team, and that's using people wherever they are and delivering a message on the out of home boards, but also combining that with radio. And I think that's just an opportunity where we talk about using out of home not as a complementary joker, but basically the foundation of a campaign, and using radio to add a little spice versus the opposite. So very, very proud of that campaign.
I think one of the great things about out of home as a medium is that we are complementary to other media formats. And one of the things that I try to speak about quite regularly and often is we're not here to compete. We're complementary. And as soon as we kind of shift the narrative to say we want to steal dollars from this, we want to steal dollars from that, and we move it to we actually want to enhance the overall efficacy of a campaign for a particular brand, the mindset shifts from the buyer's perspective, because you're actually approaching it at a different perspective. You're not just trying to like throw something down their throats and like, you know, sell one particular medium over another particular medium. It becomes more of a cohesive sort of approach to, you know, if you want to call it MMM, or if you just want to call it just like straight up planning and buying, which I think is quite powerful. So we've got about 8 minutes. I'm sorry, Luis, jump in.
So I'll jump in because this question is actually very important. I think I'm going to turn over to Madeleine and Kathleen to ask them what are the do's and don'ts from a creative standpoint that either reps, clients, or agencies should look out for in terms of out of home in Quebec.
Big question here.
Yeah.
I mean, we did address it a bit with the Quebec code that we've been discussing throughout this panel. I think it's extremely important to really grasp what Quebec is all about, because like, it's not really true that you can take a national campaign and just flip it to the Quebec market, because you cannot necessarily use, like, let's say just language wise, you cannot really use a direct translation from English usually, because we have like our specific word plays, expressions that we recognize ourselves in. And I think it's true for every market or culture. Like we like to recognize ourselves in an advertising campaign or in anything that we're consuming. So I think for me, it's really important to understand and kind of crack the code of Quebec, because like Quebecers actually like advertising when it's well done. They love to laugh, they love creativity. So it can be a very fun way to play with out of home and when you really understand, the language and the star system and the culture here. So I'd say for me, it's a very creative standpoint of it, but I think it's very important, especially in out of home, to really understand this language difference.
Yeah, and advertising in a way is a reflection of a society's culture and key loves, right? So understanding Quebecers is the key to understanding how to do out of home in Quebec. To me, it's a given, and we had it in our notes as well. So it's gonna sound like the Quebec Code was sponsoring this talk, but I really highly recommend this read. And what I find funny is the 7 cultural traits. It's 7, right? And there's this famous rule in advertising and out of home advertising about the 7 word limitations, right? So they understood a way to be clear and to understand
7 and 7 lucky numbers.
Exactly, but it's a way to very much so, even if you're not in Quebec, to understand the core nuances of Quebecers. And for example, we talked a lot about humor and creativity, so I won't go back on that, but there's other points in this book talking about the victim card, for example, which is not necessarily as glamorous, but it's true. Quebecers love to play the victim card. They love to victimize themselves, and we are also very nostalgic. So these are also other creative points that you can get inspired from to create punchlines, 5 to 7 funny punchlines. And in terms of do's and don'ts, the bigger don't, and Marianne mentioned it, it is to not translate your ad. Don't just go into the reflex of translating from English to French, because you're going to lose any opportunity to create any sense of proximity with Quebecers, because we can see when ads are translated. It shows.
I was going to ask, is that like that to me might seem offensive if it's translated inaccurately. Like it needs to be contextually relevant to your nuances specifically.
100%. And like you mentioned, we're part of the industry, so we take a closer look at ads in general, but I can definitely say, and I can tell whenever I see an ad or a spot that is translated. So don't go into that reflex when possible, and don't be boring. Have fun, right? Be creative, be innovative. And I think Quebecers will love it.
And I would mention, and I'll only bring this up because it was a retailer that no longer exists, so I can't offend them. But they had read enough about Quebec to figure out that Saint-Jean-Baptiste was more celebrated than Canada Day. So they said, oh, let's do a media placement around that. But that's where their understanding of Quebec stopped, because they proceeded to run the Canada Day creative, wishing Quebecers as happy Saint-Jean-Baptiste. So it does happen, you know, so I guess it was 50% effort where they identified there was a different day, but they kind of fell flat on the adapting it to the culture. So, you know, and we'll help you, honestly. Ask us questions, all of us here. I think, you know, when especially myself and Shannon, and I'm sure the other providers as well who aren't on the panel, like, we'll help you. Don't, you know, don't hesitate to ask questions.
I love this so much. Great context. We have 3 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, please drop them into the chat. There is one question that came in just right before the panel started, and this came in by email. I'm gonna pose this question to the media owner, Shannon. Perhaps I could throw this to you, but specifically the question reads: when clients from cannabis, alcohol, and gaming industry approach you, how are you managing these those regulations around advertising restrictions in the Quebec marketplace?
Fair. Okay, I've got 3 minutes. Thanks.
I know. Sorry. Just
try to be as
cram it in 3 minutes.
Try to be as succinct as possible. Actually, well, for certain of those categories, it's actually quite simple. That we have some very clear legislation in Quebec. So, as an example, cannabis, it's a no-go. So in Quebec, there is a no-go, with the exception of advertising stores that sell a cannabis product, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. We're talking, you know, mostly about
so
cannabis.
Like you could put a brand logo of a retailer.
There's, you know, in 3 minutes, I won't get into the details. We can always, please, again, to Jerome's point, reach out. We've got great legal teams that can help provide advice to this, but as a general rule, cannabis, no go. If you want to advertise a specific store location that happens to sell paraphernalia, you can do that, but you can't make reference to the cannabis. Okay, so that's where it gets very, very touchy. Same thing for tobacco and vaping. So Quebec, no go. Alcohol, pretty straightforward, but we do have to, you know, have the RACG, so basically our government entity, provide their seal of approval on alcohol. Obviously, when we talk about alcohol, you know, we can't have it addressed to minors, can't use minors in the advertising, can't promote discounting prices, et cetera, et cetera. So we, obviously, from our standpoint, we make sure that we're well aware from high schools, well away from high schools and from schools. The gaming one, I could take another whole.
That's a whole topic on its own, I think.
Yeah, a whole topic on itself. What I will say is that we have lack of government policy on the .nets. Okay, but we can't take sports book as an example and true gambling revenues. So anybody who's making money on trying to do a sports book a la MGM or, you know, other DraftKings, etc. In Quebec, we can't do that. We've got, you know, Lotto Quebec as our, you know, government sports book. That being said, you know, we do accept the .nets, and when I say we do accept, Lotto Quebec has made some arrangements with certain players for exclusivity rights, et cetera, but in terms of legally, you can advertise .nets in the province.
Very interesting, and we are right on time for the end of this incredibly insightful session. I have to say thank you so much, Shannon. Even just this last little bit, I wish we had a session on that topic alone.
Next time.
It is next time. Just a quick thank you to Luis for co-moderating with me. Thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. And to all of the panelists, thank you very much. All of the panelists, Catherine, Jerome, I'm sorry, I'm going to cough, Marianne, and Shannon. Thank you for sticking through this with me, and to everybody who stayed on to the very end. Appreciate your time. If you need any more info, reach out to the COMMB team, reach out to the panelists directly. We're here to support. If you want to get in touch with any of the panelists, please feel free to ping the COMMB team directly. And if you have follow-up questions, there's still a healthy group on this panel currently, so you can throw questions in the chat or just send it to the COMMB team, and we can distribute those questions for follow-ups afterwards. Shameless self-promotion, please sign up for the COMMB newsletters. There was some questions about case studies and newsletters. We have 2 different newsletters, a regular newsletter as well as a recent newsletter that we just dropped called The Drop, that's focused specifically on category insights, infographics, case studies, etc. If you have a case study you want to share with us, come reach out, and we're here to help. So amazing panel. Thank you guys so much. Really, really insightful. And there's some stuff going in the chat from the COMMB team. Sarah, thank you for working behind the scenes, behind the COMMB pin, for dropping some info into the chat for everybody. And have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.